Thumbling as Journeyman. Thumbling'S Travels. Once upon a time, there lived a tailor, a simple man of needle and thread, who had but one son. This son was unlike other children, for he was no bigger than a thumb, and because of this curious size, he was always called Thumbling. Though his body was small, his spirit was filled with boldness. And one day he spoke to his father and said, "Father, I must go forth into the wide world. My heart longs for it." The tailor, though saddened at the thought of parting, answered kindly, "That is well, my son. If it is your will to go, you shall not go without a weapon." He took a long darning needle, fixed a shining knob of sealing wax upon the end of it in the light of the candle, and handed it to the boy. "Here is a sword for your journey. May it serve you well." Before setting out, Thumbling wished for one last meal with his parents. He hopped nimbly into the kitchen to see what his mother had cooked. The dish was already set upon the hearth, steaming in the warmth of the fire. "Mother, what is there for us today?" he asked. "See for yourself," she replied. So Thumbling climbed up onto the hearth, leaned over the dish, and stretched his little neck as far as it would go. But alas, the rising steam caught him, lifted him as though upon invisible wings, and bore him up through the chimney. For a while, he rode upon the cloud of steam, high above the roof, until at last he drifted down gently to the ground outside. And so it came to pass that the little tailor was carried away from his home, and had begun his adventures in the great world. He wandered from place to place, and sought work with masters of his craft. Yet he soon found their food plain and tasteless. "Mistress," said he one evening, "if you give us no better fare, I shall be gone, and tomorrow I will chalk upon your door, 'Too many potatoes, too little meat. Farewell, Mr. Potato King.'" At this, the mistress grew angry. "What would you demand, grasshopper?" she cried, and seized a cloth to strike him. But the little fellow darted under a thimble, peeped out, and stuck out his tongue. When she tried to lift the thimble, he leapt into the folds of the cloth, and then into a crack in the table. "Ho, ho, mistress!" he laughed, and poked out his head. She struck at him again, but he slipped into a drawer. At last she caught him, and in her fury drove him out of the house. So Thumbling traveled on until he came to a great dark forest. There he fell in with a band of robbers plotting to steal the king's treasure. When they saw him, they whispered, "This little fellow can creep through a keyhole for us. He shall be our thief." One cried out mockingly, "Hallo, thou giant Goliath, will you help us into the treasure chamber?" You can slip through and cast the money out." Thumbling thought for a while, then said, "Yes, I will go with you." He examined the doors of the chamber, above and below, until he found a crack wide enough to admit his tiny body. The sentries outside spied him. One said, "See that ugly spider creeping there? I shall crush it." "Let the poor thing be," said the other. "It does no harm." And so Thumbling crept safely inside, opened the window, and began to throw down one silver thaler after another. But suddenly, the king himself came to inspect his treasure. Thumbling slipped into hiding. The king saw that coins were missing, yet the locks and bolts were untouched. And he went away troubled, warning the guards to keep close watch. When Thumbling resumed his work, the clinking of coins betrayed him. The guards rushed in, but Thumbling was swifter. He covered himself with a thaler and cried, "Here am I!" When they ran to that corner, he had hopped to another, again calling out, "Ho, ho, here am I!" Thus he fooled them again and again until they were weary and left the chamber. Then he cast down the last coin, leapt upon it, and slid through the window to the robbers. "Thou art a brave hero," they said. "Wilt thou be our captain?" But Thumbling refused. "First, I must see more of the world," he answered. They divided the spoils, and he asked only for a single kreutzer, for that was all he could carry. He buckled on his needle sword once more, bade farewell, and continued on his way. He worked for various masters, but his heart was never content. At last, he took service in an inn. There the maids disliked him, for he spied on their secret misdeeds, what they stole from the plates and carried from the cellar, and told it all to the master. The maids conspired against him. One day, while mowing in the garden, a maid spied him, leaping among the stalks. Swiftly, she swept him up with the grass, tied him in a cloth, and tossed him secretly to the cows. A great black cow swallowed him down. Inside, it was dark and close, and Thumbling fared ill. When the cow was milked, he cried out, "Strip, strap, strull. Will the pail soon be full?" But none heard him for the clatter of the milk. Soon the master came into the byre and said, "This cow shall be killed tomorrow." Thumbling was sore afraid. He cried out, "Let me out first, for I am shut up inside her." The master heard a voice, but could not tell whence it came. Next morning, the cow was slaughtered. Happily, Thumbling escaped the knife and fell among the sausage meat. When the butcher began to chop, he cried with all his might, "Chop, not too deep, for I am among it." But the chopping was loud, and none understood. Quick-witted, he slipped nimbly between the blows and was not harmed. Still, he was pressed into the black pudding, hung in the chimney to smoke, and there time weighed heavy on him. At last, in the winter, the pudding was brought forth for a guest. As the hostess cut it into slices, Thumbling waited until the moment was right, then sprang out and escaped. He journeyed on once more, yet his freedom did not last. In the fields, he was snapped up by a fox. "Hello, Mr. Fox," cried Thumbling. "It is I who stick in your throat. Let me go free." "True," said the fox, "you are too small to fill my belly. Promise me the fowls in your father's yard, and I will release you." "With all my heart," replied Thumbling. "You shall have them." So the fox set him down and even carried him home. When the father beheld his dear son again, he gladly gave the fox all the hens and cocks. Thumbling, however, placed in his father's hand the single kreutzer he had earned on his travels, saying, "Here is also a piece of money I have brought for you." And though the hens were lost, the father held his son close, thinking no treasure greater than having Thumbling safe at home once more. Fitcher's Bird. There was once a wizard, old and cunning, who knew 100 disguises and 1,000 dark arts. In the villages, he would take upon himself the likeness of a poor and feeble beggar, his garments tattered, his shoulders stooped beneath a wicker basket, as though he sought only scraps of bread or alms for his hunger. Yet his purpose was far more dreadful, for when a kind-hearted maiden stretched out her hand to offer him charity, he would seize her with a single touch, and she would be compelled, as though by enchantment, to leap into his basket. Then he would stride away on long legs into the depths of the forest, carrying her into his hidden dwelling. And none who vanished with him were ever seen again. Now it came to pass that he knocked one morning upon the door of a man who had 3 daughters, each fairer than the other. When the eldest stepped outside with a piece of bread to feed the poor stranger, the wizard brushed her hand, and in a moment she was swallowed into his basket. He hastened away into the shadowy woods, and after a long journey came to his house, which stood alone in the heart of the forest. The house was filled with splendid things: golden cups, silver dishes, jewels glimmering in the corners, and silken draperies on the walls. To the maiden he spoke gently, saying, "My darling, thou hast all that thy heart could wish for. Here shalt thou live in comfort. Here shalt thou be happy." For a few days he treated her kindly. Then he said, "I must travel far, and thou shalt remain here. Here are the keys to every chamber. Explore as thou wilt. But this small key opens one room only, and upon thy life thou must not enter it. Shouldst thou disobey, thy death will be swift. And this egg thou must carry with thee always. Guard it well, for if it be lost, calamity will fall. The maiden promised obedience. When he departed, she wandered through the shining rooms, gazing upon treasures beyond her imagining. But her heart was restless, and her mind tormented by the forbidden door. At length, curiosity overcame her. She slipped the little key into the lock. The door sprang wide, and horror met her eyes. In the center of the chamber stood a basin filled with blood. Within lay the mangled limbs of many girls who had gone before her. Near it stood a block of wood, and upon it gleamed an axe heavy with murder. In terror, she let fall the egg, which plunged into the basin. Though she snatched it out and washed it with trembling hands, the stain of blood clung fast, returning no matter how she scrubbed. Soon, the wizard returned. "Give me the keys and the egg," said he. She placed them in his hand, but he saw at once the crimson mark. His face darkened. "Thou hast entered the chamber against my command," said he. "Now against thy will, thou shalt go there again. Thy life is ended." He dragged her by the hair, struck off her head upon the block, hewed her into pieces, and flung her body into the basin with the rest. Not long after, he came again to the father's house in beggar's guise. The second daughter, pitying his hunger, brought him bread. At his touch, she too was snared, borne away to the forest, and given the keys and the egg. And like her sister, she yielded to curiosity, opened the dreadful door, stained the egg, and was slain without mercy. At last, he came for the third daughter. She was wise and wary. When he gave her the keys and the egg, she hid the egg safely away before she began her search. She, too, entered the forbidden chamber and saw the bloody basin. And there she found her sisters, lying torn and lifeless. With brave heart, she gathered their scattered limbs, set head to shoulders, arms to body, legs in their place. When all was joined, the pieces stirred. The maidens opened their eyes and were restored to life. They embraced her with tears of joy. When the wizard returned, she gave him the egg unstained, and he said, "Thou hast stood the trial. Now thou shalt be my bride." But his power over her was broken. She contrived a plan. She said, "First, thou must carry a gift of gold to my father and mother upon thy own back. Meanwhile, I shall make ready for the wedding." She hid her sisters in a great basket, covered them with gold so that none could see them, and said to him, "Take this to my parents. I will look out of my little window to watch thee, and see if thou restest on the way." The basket was heavy, and as the wizard staggered under its weight, he longed to rest. But from inside the basket came a voice, "I see thee through my little window. Rise up, go on, tarry not." He thought it was the bride calling, and so he stumbled forward. Again he tried to pause, and again the voice cried out. Thus he was driven on, sweating and groaning, until he reached the parents' house and left the gold and the rescued daughters behind. Meanwhile, the clever maiden prepared for the feast. She placed a skull, decked with flowers and ornaments, in the garret window, so it looked down as though it were the bride herself. Then she covered her body in honey, rolled in the feathers of a feather bed, and made herself into a strange bird no one could know. In this guise, she left the house. On the road, she met the wizard's wedding guests, who called to her, "O Fitcher's bird, how comest thou here?" "I come from Fitcher's house quite near." "And what is the young bride doing?" "From cellar to garret she's swept all clean, and now from the window she peeps, I ween." She answered thus to all she met. At last she encountered the wizard himself. He too asked her the same. And when he looked up to the garret and saw the skull crowned with flowers, he thought his bride was indeed watching for him. He raised his hand in greeting and went within. But scarcely had he and his friends gathered in the house when the bride's brothers and kinsmen, summoned by her sisters, arrived with weapons. They barred every door so that none might escape, and they set the house ablaze. The flames roared and consumed wizard and guests alike. So perished the murderer, and the 3 sisters were saved. The Almond Tree. Long time ago, perhaps as much as 2,000 years, there was a rich man, and he had a beautiful and pious wife, and they loved each other very much, and they had no children, though they wished greatly for some, and the wife prayed for one day and night. Now, in the courtyard in front of their house stood an almond tree, and one day in winter the wife was standing beneath it and paring an apple, and as she pared it, she cut her finger, and the blood fell upon the snow. "Ah," said the woman, sighing deeply and looking down at the blood, "if only I could have a child as red as blood and as white as snow." And as she said these words, her heart suddenly grew light, and she felt sure she should have her wish. So she went back to the house, and when a month had passed, the snow was gone. In 2 months, everything was green. In 3 months, the flowers sprang out of the earth. In 4 months, the trees were in full leaf, and the branches were thickly entwined. The little birds began to sing, so that the woods echoed, and the blossoms fell from the trees. When the 5th month had passed, the wife stood under the almond tree, and it smelt so sweet that her heart leaped within her, and she fell on her knees for joy. And when the 6th month had gone, the fruit was thick and fine, and she remained still. And the 7th month she gathered the almonds and ate them eagerly, and was sick and sorrowful. And when the 8th month had passed, she called to her husband and said, weeping, "If I die, bury me under the almond tree." Then she was comforted and happy until the 9th month had passed. And then she bore a child, as white as snow and as red as blood. And when she saw it, her joy was so great that she died. Her husband buried her under the almond tree, and he wept sore. Time passed, and he became less sad. And after he had grieved a little more, he left off. And then he took another wife. His second wife bore him a daughter, and his first wife's child was a son, as red as blood and as white as snow. Whenever the wife looked at her daughter, she felt great love for her. But whenever she looked at the little boy, evil thoughts came into her heart of how she could get all her husband's money for her daughter, and how the boy stood in the way. And so she took great hatred to him and drove him from one corner to another, and gave him a buffet here and a cuff there, so that the poor child was always in disgrace. When he came back after school hours, there was no peace for him. Once, when the wife went into the room upstairs, her little daughter followed her and said, "Mother, give me an apple." "Yes, my child," said the mother, and gave her a fine apple out of the chest. And the chest had a great heavy lid with a strong iron lock. "Mother," said the little girl, "shall not my brother have one too?" That was what the mother expected, and she said, "Yes, when he comes back from school." And when she saw from the window that he was coming, an evil thought crossed her mind, and she snatched the apple and took it from her little daughter, saying, "You shall not have it before your brother." Then she threw the apple into the chest and shut to the lid. Then the little boy came in at the door, and she said to him in a kind tone, but with evil looks, "My son, will you have an apple?" "Mother," said the boy, "how terrible you look. Yes, give me an apple." Then she spoke as kindly as before, holding up the cover of the chest. "Come here and take out one for yourself." And as the boy was stooping over the open chest, crash went the lid down so that his head flew off among the red apples. But then the woman felt great terror and wondered how she could escape the blame. And she went to the chest of drawers in her bedroom and took a white handkerchief out of the nearest drawer, and fitting the head to the neck, she bound them with the handkerchief so that nothing should be seen, and set him on a chair before the door with the apple in his hand. Then came little Marjorie into the kitchen to her mother, who was standing before the fire, stirring a pot of hot water. "Mother," said Marjorie, "my brother is sitting before the door, and he has an apple in his hand and looks very pale. I asked him to give me the apple, but he did not answer me. It seems very strange." "Go again to him," said the mother, "and if he will not answer you, give him a box on the ear." So Marjorie went again and said, "Brother, give me the apple." But as he took no notice, she gave him a box on the ear, and his head fell off, at which she was greatly terrified, and began to cry and scream, and ran to her mother, and said, "Oh, mother, I have knocked my brother's head off," and cried and screamed, and would not cease. "Oh, Marjorie," said her mother, "what have you done? But keep quiet, that no one may see there is anything the matter. It can't be helped now. We will put him out of the way safely." When the father came home and sat down to table, he said, "Where is my son?" But the mother was filling a great dish full of black broth, and Marjorie was crying bitterly, for she could not refrain. Then the father said again, "Where is my son?" "Oh," said the mother, "he is gone into the country to his great uncle's to stay for a little while." "What should he go for?" said the father. "And without bidding me goodbye, too." "Oh, he wanted to go so much, and he asked me to let him stay there 6 weeks. He will be well taken care of." "Dear me," said the father, "I am quite sad about it. It was not right of him to go without bidding me goodbye." With that, he began to eat, saying, "Marjorie, what are you crying for? Your brother will come back sometime." After a while, he said, "Well, wife, the food is very good. Give me some more." And the more he ate, the more he wanted, until he had eaten it all up, and be through the bones under the table. Then Marjorie went to her chest of drawers and took one of her best handkerchiefs from the bottom drawer, and picked up all the bones from under the table and tied them up in her handkerchief, and went out at the door, crying bitterly. She laid them in the green grass under the almond tree, and immediately her heart grew light again, and she wept no more. Then the almond tree began to wave to and fro, and the boughs drew together, and then parted, just like a clapping of hands for joy. Then a cloud rose from the tree, and in the midst of the cloud there burned a fire, and out of the fire a beautiful bird arose, and singing most sweetly, soared high into the air. And when he had flown away, the almond tree remained as it was before, but the handkerchief full of bones was gone. Marjorie felt quite glad and light-hearted, just as if her brother were still alive. So she went back merrily into the house and had her dinner. The bird, when it flew away, perched on the roof of a goldsmith's house and began to sing. It was my mother who murdered me. It was my father who ate of me. It was my sister, Marjorie, who all my bones in pieces found. Hem in a handkerchief she bound, and laid them under the almond tree. Kiewit, 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 I cry. Oh, what a beautiful bird am I. The goldsmith was sitting in his shop, making a golden chain. And when he heard the bird, who was sitting on his roof and singing, he started up to go and look. And as he passed over his threshold, he lost one of his slippers. And he went into the middle of the street with a slipper on one foot and only a sock on the other, with his apron on and the gold chain in one hand and the pincers in the other. And so he stood in the sunshine, looking up at the bird. "Bird," said he, "how beautifully you sing. Do sing that piece over again." "No," said the bird, "I do not sing for nothing twice. If you will give me that gold chain, I will sing again." "Very well," said the goldsmith. "Here is the gold chain. Now do as you said." Down came the bird, and took the gold chain in his right claw, perched in front of the goldsmith, and sang, "It was my mother who murdered me. It was my father who ate of me. It was my sister Marjorie, who all my bones in pieces found. Them in a handkerchief she bound, and laid them under the almond tree. Kiewit, 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 I cry. Oh, what a beautiful bird am I." Then the bird flew to a shoemaker's, and perched on his roof, and sang, "It was my mother who murdered me. It was my father who ate of me. It was my sister, Marjorie, who all my bones in pieces found. Them in a handkerchief she bound, and laid them under the almond tree. Kiewit, 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 I cry. Oh, what a beautiful bird am I." When the shoemaker heard, he ran out of his door in his shirt sleeves and looked up at the roof of his house, holding his hand to shade his eyes from the sun. "Bird," said he, "how beautifully you sing." Then he called in at his door, "Wife, come out directly. Here is a bird singing beautifully. Only listen." Then he called his daughter, all his children, and acquaintance, both young men and maidens. And they came up the street and gazed on the bird and saw how beautiful it was, with red and green feathers, and round its throat was as it were gold, and its eyes twinkled in its head like stars. "Bird," said the shoemaker, "do sing that piece over again." "No," said the bird, "I may not sing for nothing twice. You must give me something." "Wife," said the man, "go into the shop. On the top shelf stands a pair of red shoes. Bring them here." So the wife went and brought the shoes. "Now, bird," said the man, "sing us that piece again." And the bird came down and took the shoes in his left claw and flew up again to the roof and sang, "It was my mother who murdered me. It was my father who ate of me. It was my sister, Marjorie, who all my bones in pieces found. Hem in a handkerchief she bound, and laid them under the almond tree. Kiewit, 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 I see why. Oh, what a beautiful bird am I." And when he had finished, he flew away, with the chain in his right claw, and the shoes in his left claw. And he flew till he reached a mill. And the mill went clip, clap, clip, clap, clip, clap. And in the mill sat 20 miller's men, hewing a millstone. Hick, hack, hick, hack, hick, hack, while the mill was going clip, clap, clip, clap, clip, clap. And the bird perched on a linden tree that stood in front of the mill and sang, "It was my mother who murdered me." Here one of the men looked up. "It was my father who ate of me." Then 2 more looked up and listened. "It was my sister, Marjorie." Here 4 more looked up, who all my bones in pieces found. Them in a handkerchief she bound. Now there were only 8 left hewing, and laid them under the almond tree. Now only 5. Kiewit, 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 I cry. Now only 1. Oh, what a beautiful bird am I. At length the last one left off, and he only heard the end. "Bird," said he, "how beautifully you sing. Let me hear it all. Sing that again." "No," said the bird, "I may not sing it twice for nothing. If you will give me the millstone, I will sing it again." "Indeed," said the man, "if it belonged to me alone, you should have it." "All right," said the others. "If he sings again, he shall have it." Then the bird came down, and all the 20 millers heaved up the stone with poles. Yo, heave ho, yo, heave ho. And the bird stuck his head through the hole in the middle, and with the millstone round his neck, he flew up to the tree and sang, "It was my mother who murdered me. It was my father who ate of me. It was my sister, Marjorie, who all my bones in pieces found. Them in a handkerchief she bound, and laid them under the almond tree. Kaiwit, 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 I cry. Oh, what a beautiful bird am I. And when he had finished, he spread his wings, having in the right claw the chain, and in the left claw the shoes, and round his neck the millstone, and he flew away to his father's house. In the parlor sat the father, the mother, and Marjorie at the table. The father said, "How light-hearted and cheerful I feel." "Nay," said the mother, "I feel very low, just as if a great storm were coming." But Marjorie sat weeping, and the bird came flying and perched on the roof. "Oh," said the father, "I feel so joyful, and the sun is shining so bright. It is as if I were going to meet with an old friend." "Nay," said the wife, "I am terrified. My teeth chatter, and there is fire in my veins." And she tore open her dress to get air. And Marjorie sat in a corner and wept, with her plate before her, until it was white, full of tears. Then the bird perched on the almond tree and sang. It was my mother who murdered me. And the mother stopped her ears and hid her eyes, and would neither see nor hear. Nevertheless, the noise of a fearful storm was in her ears, and in her eyes a quivering and burning as of lightning. It was my father who ate of me. "Oh, mother," said the father, "there is a beautiful bird singing so finely, and the sun shines, and everything smells as sweet as cinnamon." It was my sister, Marjorie. Marjorie hid her face in her lap and wept. And the father said, "I must go out to see the bird." "Oh, do not go," said the wife. "I feel as if the house were on fire." But the man went out and looked at the bird, who all my bones in pieces found. Them in a handkerchief she bound, and laid them under the almond tree. Kaiwit, Kiwit, Kaiwit, I cry. Oh, what a beautiful bird am I. With that, the bird let fall the gold chain upon his father's neck, and it fitted him exactly. So he went indoors and said, "Look what a beautiful chain the bird has given me." Then his wife was so terrified that she fell all along on the floor, and her cap came off. Then the bird began again to sing. It was my mother who murdered me. "Oh," groaned the mother, "that I were 1,000 fathoms underground, so as not to be obliged to hear it. It was my father who ate of me." Then the woman lay as if she were dead. It was my sister, Marjorie. "Oh," said Marjorie, "I will go out too, and see if the bird will give me anything." And so she went, who all my bones in pieces found. Them in a handkerchief she bound, Then he threw the shoes down to her and laid them under the almond tree. Kiwit, 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 I cry. Oh, what a beautiful bird am I. And poor Marjorie, all at once, felt happy and joyful, and put on her red shoes, and danced, and jumped for joy. Oh dear, said she, I felt so sad before I went outside, and now my heart is so light. He is a charming bird to have given me a pair of red shoes. But the mother's hair stood on end and looked like flame, and she said, even if the world is coming to an end, I must go out for a little relief. Just as she came outside the door, crash went the millstone on her head and crushed her flat. The father and daughter rushed out and saw smoke and flames of fire rise up. But when that had gone by, there stood the little brother, and he took his father and Marjorie by the hand, and they felt very happy and content, and went indoors and sat to the table and had their dinner. Old Sultan. Once there was a farmer who kept a faithful old dog named Sultan. The creature had served him well through many years, guarding the house by night and keeping watch over the fields by day. But time spares no living thing. Sultan had grown old and feeble, his strength wasted away, and worse still, he had lost every tooth in his mouth. He could no longer bite, nor hold fast even the smallest thief who might creep into the yard. One summer evening, as the sun was sinking, and the farmer stood at his doorway with his wife, he said in a rough voice, "Tomorrow I shall put an end to old Sultan. He has grown useless. He cannot guard, and he cannot fight. What good is a toothless hound?" The farmer's wife, who was kinder of heart, answered gently, "Surely we might spare him. Has he not served us faithfully these many years? When we slept, he kept watch. When we worked, he followed close behind. Let us give him a crust in his old age." But the man shook his head. Woman, you think too soft. Not a single thief fears him now. He lies in the sun and does no more than any stone in the road. He has eaten well enough all his life, and that was pay for service. Now his time is over, and I shall not feed him longer. Not far off, stretched in the dust, lay the poor dog himself, and his old ears caught every word. Sorrow filled his heart, for he knew that the morning would bring his death. He slunk away at dusk, creeping into the forest to seek counsel from his one friend, the wolf. "Comrade," said Sultan with a heavy sigh, "my master intends to kill me. I have grown weak, and tomorrow I shall be no more." The wolf, who bore him a certain fondness, replied, "Take courage, old gossip. I will help you. I have thought of a way to restore your master's favor. Early in the morning, your master and mistress will go to make hay, and they will take their little child with them, for no one is left at home. They always lay the child in the shade under the hedge while they work. You must place yourself close by, as if to guard it. I will creep forth from the wood and snatch the child in my jaws. Then you must leap up, give chase with all your might, and pursue me as though you would tear me down. I shall let the child fall unharmed, and you will carry it back. Your master will think you have saved his dearest treasure. Then he will hold you in gratitude, and never again will he think of harm." The plan seemed good to the dog, and so it was done. In the morning, the farmer screamed in terror when he saw the wolf racing across the field with his child. But old Sultan sprang up, barked with fury, and pursued him swiftly. The wolf dropped the little one, and Sultan bore it back to the trembling parents. Their joy was great. The farmer wept and stroked his faithful dog. "Never, never shall a hair of yours be harmed. You shall eat my bread as long as you live." Then he bade his wife hurry home, make a soft sop of bread and milk for Sultan, and fetch his own pillow from the bed, that the old hound might lie in comfort. From that day forth, Sultan wanted for nothing. Not long after, the wolf came to visit, proud that their scheme had prospered. "Well, gossip," said he, "now you will repay me. I shall steal one of your master's fat sheep, and you must wink an eye." But the dog answered firmly, "Do not hope it. I will remain true to my master till my death. I cannot betray him." The wolf thought the old dog jested. So in the dark of night, he crept into the fold to take a sheep. But Sultan had warned the farmer of his plan, and the man lay in wait. With a heavy flail, he struck the thief till his hide smarted sore. The wolf fled, howling, and called back over his shoulder, "Wait, old rogue, you shall pay dearly for this." The next morning, he sent the wild boar to challenge the dog. "Come to the forest," said the boar, "and settle this quarrel with tooth and claw." Sultan was troubled, for he was old and weak. He sought friends to stand by him, but none would come save a cat with only 3 legs. The faithful creature limped beside him as they went forth. The cat, because her stump pained her, held her tail upright in the air. Now the wolf and the boar were waiting. When they spied their foes, they mistook the sight. They thought the cat's tail was a drawn sword, glinting in the sun. and when she hopped on 3 legs, they believed she stooped each time to pick up a stone to hurl at them. Fear seized them both. The boar crept into the thicket, and the wolf scrambled up a tree. When Sultan and the cat arrived, they saw no one. Only the boar's ear stuck out from the brush. The cat, seeing it twitch, thought it was a mouse and leapt upon it, biting with sharp teeth. The boar squealed and dashed away, crying, "The guilty one is up in the tree." Sultan and the cat looked up, and there sat the wolf, ashamed to the bone of his cowardice. He slunk down at last, begged pardon, and made peace with the faithful dog. And from that day forward, Sultan lived in honor, guarded by loyalty, and crowned with the respect that belongs to those who serve true till the end. The 6 Swans. Once on a time, a king was hunting in a great wood, and he pursued a wild animal so eagerly that none of his people could follow him. When evening came, he stood still, and looking round him, he found that he had lost his way, and seeking a path, he found none. Then, all at once, he saw an old woman with a nodding head coming up to him, and it was a witch. "My good woman," said he, "can you show me the way out of the wood?" "Oh yes, my lord king," answered she, "certainly I can, but I must make a condition, and if you do not fulfill it, you will never get out of the wood again, but die there of hunger." "What is the condition?" asked the king. "I have a daughter," said the old woman, "who is as fair as any in the world. And if you will take her for your bride and make her queen, I will show you the way out of the wood." The king consented because of the difficulty he was in, and the old woman led him into her little house, and there her daughter was sitting by the fire. She received the king just as if she had been expecting him. And though he saw that she was very beautiful, she did not please him, and he could not look at her without an inward shudder. Nevertheless, he took the maiden before him on his horse, and the old woman showed him the way, and soon he was in his royal castle again, where the wedding was held. The king had been married before, and his first wife had left 7 children, 6 boys and 1 girl, whom he loved better than all the world. And as he was afraid the stepmother might not behave well to them, and perhaps would do them some mischief, he took them to a lonely castle standing in the middle of a wood. There they remained hidden, for the road to it was so hard to find that the king himself could not have found it, had it not been for a clue of yarn possessing wonderful properties that a wise woman had given him. When he threw it down before him, it unrolled itself and showed him the way. And the king went so often to see his dear children that the queen was displeased at his absence, and she became curious and wanted to know what he went out into the wood for so often alone. She bribed his servants with much money, and they showed her the secret and told her of the clue of Yam, which alone could point out the way. Then she gave herself no rest until she had found out where the king kept the clue, and then she made some little white silk shirts and sewed a charm in each, as she had learned witchcraft of her mother. And once, when the king had ridden to the hunt, she took the little shirts and went into the wood, and the clue of yarn showed her the way. The children, seeing someone in the distance, thought it was their dear father coming to see them, and came jumping for joy to meet him. Then the wicked queen threw over each one of the little shirts, and as soon as the shirts touched their bodies, they were changed into swans and flew away through the wood. So the queen went home, very pleased to think she had got rid of her stepchildren. But the maiden had not run out with her brothers, and so the queen knew nothing about her. The next day, the king went to see his children, but he found nobody but his daughter. "Where are thy brothers?" asked the king. "Ah, dear father," answered she, "they are gone away and have left me behind." And then she told him how she had seen from her window her brothers in the guise of swans fly away through the wood. And she showed him the feathers which they had let fall in the courtyard, and which she had picked up. The king was grieved, but he never dreamt that it was the queen who had done this wicked deed. And as he feared lest the maiden also should be stolen away from him, he wished to take her away with him. But she was afraid of the stepmother, and begged the king to let her remain one more night in the castle in the wood. Then she said to herself, "I must stay here no longer, but go and seek for my brothers." And when the night came, she fled away and went straight into the wood. She went on all that night and the next day, until she could go no longer for weariness. At last she saw a rude hut, and she went in and found a room with 6 little beds in it. She did not dare to lie down in one, but she crept under one and lay on the hard boards and wished for night. When it was near the time of sun setting, she heard a rustling sound and saw 6 swans come flying in at the window. They alighted on the ground and blew at one another until they had blown all their feathers off. And then they stripped off their swan skin as if it had been a shirt. And the maiden looked at them and knew them for her brothers, and was very glad, and crept from under the bed. The brothers were not less glad when their sister appeared, but their joy did not last long. "You must not stay here," said they to her. "This is a robber's haunt, and if they were to come and find you here, they would kill you." "And cannot you defend me?" asked the little sister. "No," answered they, For we can only get rid of our swan skins and keep our human shape every evening for a quarter of an hour. But after that, we must be changed again into swans." Their sister wept at hearing this and said, "Can nothing be done to set you free?" "Oh, no," answered they. "The work would be too hard for you. For 6 whole years, you would be obliged never to speak or laugh, and make during that time 6 little shirts out of aster flowers. If you were to let fall a single word before the work was ended, all would be of no good." And just as the brothers had finished telling her this, the quarter of an hour came to an end, and they changed into swans and flew out of the window. But the maiden made up her mind to set her brothers free, even though it should cost her her life. She left the hut, and going into the middle of the wood, she climbed a tree, and there passed the night. The next morning, she set to work and gathered asters and began sewing them together. As for speaking, there was no one to speak to, and as for laughing, she had no mind to it. So she sat on and looked at nothing but her work. When she had been going on like this for a long time, it happened that the king of that country went a-hunting in the wood, and some of his huntsmen came up to the tree in which the maiden sat. They called out to her, saying, "Who art thou?" But she gave no answer. "Come down," cried they. "We will do thee no harm." But she only shook her head, and when they tormented her further with questions, she threw down to them her gold necklace, hoping they would be content with that. But they would not leave off. So she threw down to them her girdle, and when that was no good, her garters, and one after another, everything she had on and could possibly spare, until she had nothing left but her smock. But all was no good. The huntsman would not be put off any longer, and they climbed the tree, carried the maiden off, and brought her to the king. The king asked, "Who art thou? What wert thou doing in the tree?" But she answered nothing. He spoke to her in all the languages he knew, but she remained dumb. But being very beautiful, the king inclined to her, and he felt a great love rise up in his heart towards her. And casting his mantle round her, he put her before him on his horse and brought her to his castle. Then he caused rich clothing to be put upon her, and her beauty shone as bright as the morning. But no word would she utter. He seated her by his side at table, and her modesty and gentle mien so pleased him that he said, "This maiden I choose for wife, and no other in all the world." And accordingly, after a few days, they were married. But the king had a wicked mother, who was displeased with the marriage, and spoke ill of the young queen. "Who knows where the maid can have come from?" said she, "and not able to speak a word. She is not worthy of a king." After a year had passed, and the queen brought her first first child into the world, the old woman carried it away and marked the queen's mouth with blood as she lay sleeping. Then she went to the king and declared that his wife was an eater of human flesh. The king would not believe such a thing and ordered that no one should do her any harm. And the queen went on quietly sewing the shirts and caring for nothing else. The next time that a fine boy was born, the wicked stepmother used the same deceit. But the king would give no credence to her words, for he said, "She is too tender and good to do any such thing. And if she were only not dumb and could justify herself, then her innocence would be as clear as day." When for the third time the old woman stole away the newborn child and accused the queen, who was unable to say a word in her defense, the king could do no other but give her up to justice, and she was sentenced to suffer death by fire. The day on which her sentence was to be carried out was the very last one of the 6th year of the years, during which she had neither spoken nor laughed, to free her dear brothers from the evil spell. The 6 shirts were ready, all except one, which wanted the left sleeve, and when she was led to the pile of wood, she carried the 6 shirts on her arm. And when she mounted the pile, and the fire was about to be kindled, all at once she cried out aloud, for there were 6 swans coming flying through the air, and she saw that her deliverance was near, and her heart beat for joy. The swans came close up to her with rushing wings, and stooped round her so that she could throw the shirts over them. And when that had been done, the swan skins fell off them, and her brothers stood before her in their own bodies, quite safe and sound. But as one shirt wanted the left sleeve, so the youngest brother had a swan's wing instead of a left arm. They embraced and kissed each other. And the queen went up to the king, who looked on full of astonishment, and began to speak to him and to say, "Dearest husband, now I may dare to speak and tell you that I am innocent and have been falsely accused." And she related to him the treachery of the stepmother, who had taken away the 3 children and hidden them. And she was reconciled to the king with great joy. And the wicked stepmother was bound to the stake on the pile of wood and burnt to ashes. And the king and queen lived many years with their 6 brothers in peace and joy. Sleeping Beauty. Little Briar Rose. In times past, there lived a king and queen who said to each other every day of their lives, "Would that we had a child." And yet they had none. But it happened once that when the queen was bathing, there came a frog out of the water, and he squatted on the ground and said to her, "Thy wish shall be fulfilled. Before a year has gone by, thou shalt bring a daughter into the world. And as the frog foretold, so it happened, and the queen bore a daughter so beautiful that the king could not contain himself for joy, and he ordained a great feast. Not only did he bid to it his relations, friends, and acquaintances, but also the wise women, that they might be kind and favorable to the child. There were 13 of them in his kingdom, but as he had only provided 12 golden plates for them to eat from, one of them had to be left out. However, the feast was celebrated with all splendor, and as it drew to an end, the wise women stood forward to present to the child their wonderful gifts. One bestowed virtue, one beauty, a third riches, and so on. Whatever there is in the world to wish for. And when 11 of them had said their say, in came the uninvited 13th, burning to revenge herself, and without greeting or respect, she cried with a loud voice, "In the 15th year of her age, the princess shall prick herself with a spindle and shall fall down dead." And without speaking one more word, she turned away and left the hall. Everyone was terrified at her saying when the 12th came forward, for she had not yet bestowed her gift, and though she could not do away with the evil prophecy, yet she could soften it. So she said, "The princess shall not die, but fall into a deep sleep for 100 years." Now the king, being desirous of saving his child even from this misfortune, gave commandment that all the spindles in his kingdom should be burnt up. The maiden grew up, adorned with all the gifts of the wise women. And she was so lovely, modest, sweet, and kind, and clever, that no one who saw her could help loving her. It happened one day, she being already 15 years old, that the king and queen rode abroad, and the maiden was left behind alone in the castle. She wandered about into all the nooks and corners, and into all the chambers and parlors, as the fancy took her, till at last she came to an old tower. She climbed the narrow winding stair, which led to a little door, with a rusty key sticking out of the lock. She turned the key, and the door opened, and there in the little room sat an old woman with a spindle, diligently spinning her flax. "Good day, mother," said the princess. "What are you doing?" "I am spinning," answered the old woman, nodding her head. "What thing is that twists round so briskly?" asked the maiden. And taking the spindle into her hand, she began to spin. But no sooner had she touched it than the evil prophecy was fulfilled, and she pricked her finger with it. In that very moment, she fell back upon the bed that stood there, and lay in a deep sleep. And this sleep fell upon the whole castle. The king and queen, who had returned and were in the great hall, fell fast asleep, and with them the whole court, the horses in their stalls, the dogs in the yard, the pigeons on the roof, the flies on the wall, the very fire that flickered on the hearth, became still and slept like the rest, and the meat on the spit ceased roasting, and the cook, who was going to pull the scullion's hair for some mistake he had made, let him go and went to sleep. And the wind ceased, and not a leaf fell from the trees about the castle. Then round about that place there grew a hedge of thorns, thicker every year, until at last the whole castle was hidden from view, and nothing of it could be seen but the vane on the roof. And a rumor went abroad in all that country of the beautiful sleeping Rosamond, for so was the princess called. And from time to time many kings' sons came and tried to force their way through the hedge, but it was impossible for them to do so, for the thorns held fast together like strong hands, and the young men were caught by them, and not being able to get free, there died a lamentable death. Many a long year afterwards, there came a king's son into that country, and heard an old man tell how there should be a castle standing behind the hedge of thorns, and that there a beautiful enchanted princess named Rosamond had slept for 100 years, and with her the king and queen, and the whole court. The old man had been told by his grandfather that many kings' sons had sought to pass the thorn hedge, but had been caught and pierced by the thorns, and had died a miserable death. Then said the young man, "Nevertheless, I do not fear to try. I shall win through and see the lovely Rosamond." The good old man tried to dissuade him, but he would not listen to his words. For now the 100 years were at an end, and the day had come when Rosamond should be awakened. When the prince drew near the hedge of thorns, it was changed into a hedge of beautiful large flowers, which parted and bent aside to let him pass, and then closed behind him in a thick hedge. When he reached the castle yard, he saw the horses and brindled hunting dogs lying asleep, and on the roof the pigeons were sitting with their heads under their wings, and when he came indoors, the flies on the wall were asleep. The cook in the kitchen had his hand uplifted to strike the scullion, and the kitchen maid had the black fowl on her lap, ready to pluck. Then he mounted higher, and saw in the hall the whole court lying asleep, and above them, on their thrones, slept the king and the queen. And still he went farther, and all was so quiet that he could hear his own breathing. And at last he came to the tower, and went up the winding stair, and opened the door of the little room where Rosamond lay. And when he saw her looking so lovely in her sleep, he could not turn away his eyes. And presently he stooped and kissed her, and she awaked and opened her eyes, and looked very kindly on him. And she rose, and they went forth together, and the king and the queen and whole court waked up. and gazed on each other with great eyes of wonderment. And the horses in the yard got up and shook themselves. The hounds sprang up and wagged their tails. The pigeons on the roof drew their heads from under their wings, looked round, and flew into the field. The flies on the wall crept on a little farther. The kitchen fire leapt up and blazed and cooked the meat. The joint on the spit began to roast. The cook gave the scullion such a box on the ear that he roared out, and the maid went on plucking the fowl. Then the wedding of the prince and Rosamond was held with all splendor, and they lived very happily together until their lives' end. Fundevogel, Bird-Foundling. Once upon a time, there lived a forester who often wandered into the deep woods with his bow and quiver, for hunting was his daily task. One day, as he stepped beneath the ancient trees, he heard a shrill and pitiful cry, like that of a very small child. The sound echoed between the trunks, so strange and sorrowful that the forester's heart was stirred. He followed the voice through the thickets until he came to a tall oak whose crown touched the sky. High up among the branches sat a tiny child, weeping bitterly. The forester soon learned what had happened. The child's poor mother had been resting at the foot of the tree, overcome with weariness, and had fallen asleep with the little one in her arms. A great bird of prey had spied the helpless babe, swooped down, snatched it from the mother, and borne it to the treetop. But there, unable to do more, the bird had left its strange treasure. The forester, moved by pity, climbed the lofty branches, took the trembling child in his arms, and carried it safely down. "Thou shalt not be left to sorrow," he thought. "I will take thee home, and thou shalt grow up with my little daughter, Lina." So he did as his heart bade him, and brought the child to his dwelling. From that day forth, the children lived as brother and sister. Yet because the boy had been borne away by a bird, they called him Fundevogel. The years passed, and Lina and Fundevogel were never apart. They loved one another dearly. If the one was absent, the other grew restless and sad, as though the world had lost its brightness. Now, in the forester's household lived also an old cook, stern of face and sour of temper. One evening, Lina saw her take 2 heavy pails and go again and again to the spring, fetching water as if for some great washing. At last the girl asked, "Tell me, old Sana, why dost thou carry so much water this night?" The cook narrowed her eyes and said, "Swear thou wilt never speak of it, not to man, not to beast, and I shall tell thee." Lina full of curiosity, gave her word. Then the old woman whispered with cruel delight, "At dawn, when thy father goes hunting, I shall set the kettle upon the fire. When the water boils and bubbles, I will seize Fundevogel, cast him in, and boil him alive." Lena's heart turned cold, but she held her tongue until the morning light. When the forester had gone out hunting and the house was still, Lena turned to her dear companion. "Fundevogel," she said in haste, "if thou wilt never leave me, then I too will never forsake thee." "Neither now nor ever," he answered faithfully. "Then hear what I must tell thee," said Lena. She told him all that the cook had planned, how she had carried water into the house, and how she meant to throw him into the kettle. "But we shall not wait for death. Rise, dress thyself quickly, and let us flee together." So the two children rose, clothed themselves in haste, and stole away before the sun had climbed far above the trees. When the kettle boiled merrily, the wicked cook came to fetch her victim. But when she entered the chamber, the beds were empty. Fear seized her. "What shall I say when the master returns and finds both children gone? They must be pursued, and swiftly." She sent 3 servants running into the forest to overtake the fugitives. But Lena and Fundevogel, who had rested a little at the forest's edge, saw them approach from afar. Then Lena said, "Fundevogel, never leave me, and I will never leave thee." "Neither now nor ever," he replied. "Then become thou a rose tree," said Lena, "and I shall be the single rose that blooms upon it." When the servants came to the place, there was nothing to be seen but a bush with one fair rose. The children were nowhere. They returned and told the cook, who stamped her feet in anger. "Simpletons! Ye should have cut the bush in 2 and plucked the rose besides. Go, and do it properly this time." So back into the wood they went. Yet again the children saw them coming. Lena whispered the old words, and Fundevogel answered as ever, "Neither now nor ever." This time Lena said, "Be thou a great church, and I shall be the shining chandelier within it." When the servants arrived, they found only a tall church standing solemn and silent, and a glittering chandelier swinging from the roof. Perplexed, they returned once more. The cook's fury knew no bounds. "Fools! Ye should have torn down the church and brought the bright light home. Now I myself shall go with you." So she set out, waddling after them with spite in her heart. But the children spied them from far off. Again, Lena said the sacred vow, and Fundevogel gave his answer. Then Lena commanded, "Be thou a fish pond, and I shall be the duck upon it. When the cook came up, she saw a wide pond, the water clear and still, and a duck swimming upon it. Greedy and cunning, she thought to drink the pond dry, and so lay down beside it. But the duck darted towards her, seized her by the head, and dragged her deep into the water. Thus, the wicked old woman was drowned, and her wickedness ended forever. Then the children rose again in their true forms, and hand in hand they went home together, full of joy and laughter. The forester welcomed them, and from that day forward no harm came near them. And if they have not died, they are living still, faithful and happy, side by side. King Thrushbeard. Once upon a time, there lived a king whose daughter was of such beauty that words scarcely sufficed to tell of it. Yet for all her fairness, she was haughty in spirit and proud in heart, so that no suitor seemed worthy in her eyes. One after another she dismissed, and those who dared present themselves she mocked with sharp words, making sport of their looks and manners until they withdrew in shame. Now it happened that the king, weary of her scorn and anxious to see her well married, proclaimed a great feast. From distant realms and from nearby lands, he summoned every noble youth of rank who might aspire to her hand. On the appointed day, they gathered, kings and grand dukes, princes, earls, barons, and gentlemen, each arrayed in splendid raiment, each presented in proper order according to his station. The king's daughter was led before them to choose where her heart inclined. Yet to every man she had a jest ready upon her lips. One was too stout, and she laughed aloud, calling him a cask of wine. Another was too tall and thin, and she cried, "Long and lank has little in his tank." A third was too short, and she said with disdain, "Stout and small runs not at all." The fourth was pale, "As one as a ghost," she scoffed. The fifth was ruddy and bold-faced, and she sneered, "A fighting cock, fit only for the yard." The sixth was bent of body, and she mocked him as a log dried crooked behind the stove. Thus she had a taunt for everyone. Yet above all, she poured her ridicule upon a good and kindly king, whose chin was somewhat crooked, not ill-favored, but marked as though nature had pressed it awry. When she saw him, she burst into laughter and called aloud, "Behold, he has a chin like the beak of a thrush." And from that hour, all men gave him the name of King Thrushbeard. The old king, her father, was sorely angered when he beheld how his daughter mocked all who came with honorable intent. Rising in wrath, he declared before the whole company that since she held in contempt every suitor of noble blood, she should be given in marriage to the first beggar who knocked at his gate. Not many days thereafter, a wandering fiddler came singing beneath the palace windows, clad in tattered garments, hoping for a coin or crust. When the king heard the tune, he bade the man be brought in. The fiddler entered, bowed low, and sang his song before the king and the princess. When the last note had faded, he asked humbly for a small gift. The king answered, "Your song pleases me well, and for reward I give you my daughter to wife." The proud princess turned pale, and her heart quaked within her. But the king's word was law. "I swore an oath," said he, "that I would give you to the very first beggar, and my oath I shall keep." All her tears and pleadings were of no avail. The priest was summoned, and there, in that very hour, the king's daughter was wedded to the ragged fiddler. When the vows were spoken, the king said sternly, "It is not fitting that a beggar's wife should dwell in my halls. Go forth with your husband and seek your dwelling where you may." So the fiddler took her by the hand, and together they departed on foot. They came first to a great forest, tall and green. The princess asked, "To whom does this fair forest belong?" "It is King Thrushbeard's," the fiddler replied. "Had you chosen him, it would have been yours." She sighed and said, "Ah, wretched girl that I am, if only I had taken King Thrushbeard." Next, they passed a wide meadow, bright with grass and flowers. "To whom does this meadow belong?" she asked. "To King Thrushbeard," said he. "Had you taken him, it would have been yours." Again she lamented, "Ah, foolish girl, if only I had taken King Thrushbeard." Then they came to a noble town, its streets broad and its towers proud. "Whose city is this?" she asked. "King Thrushbeard's," answered the fiddler. "Had you taken him, it would have been yours." She wept and cried once more, "Woe is me that I refused King Thrushbeard." At last they came to a wretched little hut. "And to whom belongs this miserable place?" she asked. "To me and to you," said the fiddler. "Here we shall dwell together." She had to stoop low to pass through the poor door, and within there was no servant, no comfort. "Set the fire," said the man, "and cook me my supper, for I am weary." But the king's daughter knew nothing of fire or cooking, and so the beggar man was forced to lend his own hand. Thus they lived in hardship. When the little store of food was gone, the man said, "Wife, we cannot sit idle. You must learn a craft. Weave baskets." He cut willows and set them before her, but the rough twigs wounded her tender fingers. Then he bade her spin, yet the coarse flax cut her skin till blood stained the thread. At last he said, "You are fit for no work. I have made a sorry bargain. You must sell pottery in the market." Ashamed, she sat in the marketplace. Because of her beauty, the people bought readily, and some gave her money without taking the wares. For a time they lived thus. But one day, a drunken soldier rode through the market and trampled her pots into shards. She ran home weeping, and her husband said, "Cease your tears. I see you are unfit for trade. I have sought a place for you in the king's kitchens. There you shall work and earn your bread." So the proud princess became a scullion, doing the lowest tasks and carrying home scraps in small jars tied to her gown. It chanced that the king's eldest son was to be wed, and the palace was filled with splendor. The poor woman stood by the door to watch, her heart aching at her fallen state. The halls glittered with light. Noble ladies and lords entered in grandeur, and music filled the air. The smell of rich dishes reached her, and servants, in pity, tossed her morsels, which she hid in her jars. Then the bridegroom came, clothed in velvet and silk, gold chains upon his neck. When his eyes fell upon her, he seized her hand and drew her forth to dance. She trembled, for she knew him at once. It was King Thrushbeard. She resisted, but he led her on, and in the struggle, the cords of her jars broke, the food spilled, and laughter rose all around. Shamed beyond measure, she fled. But on the stairs, he met her again. Then he spoke gently, saying, "Be not afraid. I am he, the fiddler, the soldier, the beggar. All was but a disguise, contrived for love of you and to humble your pride. You mocked me once, but I could not forget you. Therefore, I brought you low, that you might learn compassion and wisdom." She wept sorely and confessed her folly, saying, "I am unworthy to be your wife." But he lifted her and said, "Take heart. The hard days are past. This day we shall be wed indeed." Then he clothed her in garments of splendor, and her father and all the court came to rejoice. The feast was greater still, and merriment filled the land. And so the proud princess became the bride of King Thrushbeard, and their joy was true and lasting. And if we had been there, surely we too would have shared in the feast and the dancing. Roland. Once, long ago, there lived a woman who was no ordinary widow or mother, but a witch of cruel heart and cunning arts. She had 2 daughters beneath her roof. One was her own flesh and blood, ugly of face and crooked of spirit, yet dearly cherished by the witch, for evil loves its own. The other was but a stepchild, fair as morning light and gentle in all her ways. And for that very reason, the old woman despised her, for envy burns fiercest when virtue dwells close at hand. One day, the stepdaughter wore a neat and pretty apron, plain in weave, but bright with youth's grace. The witch's daughter, covetous and sour, fixed her greedy eyes upon it. Her heart swelled with jealousy, and she whispered bitterly to her mother that she must and should have that apron, for she could not rest until it was hers. "Peace, my child," crooned the witch, her eyes gleaming. "Thou shalt indeed have it. Thy stepsister has lived too long already, and tonight I will rid us of her once for all. While she lies sleeping, I shall come and hew off her head. Only take care to lie upon the farthest side of the bed and press her outwards." The wicked plot might well have succeeded, had not the poor maiden stood hidden in the corner and heard every dreadful word. Her heart trembled, yet she spoke not a syllable all that day, nor dared she venture beyond the door. When night fell, her stepsister crept greedily into the bed first, claiming the safer place against the wall. But when sleep weighed down the jealous girl's lids, the stepdaughter gently pressed her outward, and herself took the inner side. At midnight, the witch came stealing in, an axe glittering in her hand. With her gnarled left, she groped for the sleeper lying on the edge. Then, raising the weapon with both arms, she smote, and the head of her own daughter rolled from her shoulders. Grim and satisfied, the witch crept away, never dreaming of her fatal mistake. The stepdaughter, silent and pale, slipped from the bed. She hastened to the dwelling of her sweetheart, a faithful youth named Roland, and knocked until he came forth. Breathless, she told him all. "Dear Roland, we must flee this very hour. My stepmother sought my life and has slain her own child instead. When dawn reveals the deed, she will surely hunt us down." Roland answered, "Then we must not tarry. Yet take with thee her magic wand, for without it we cannot hope to withstand her pursuit." The maiden returned, seized the witch's wand, and, taking also the severed head, let 3 drops of blood fall, one beside the bed, one upon the kitchen hearth, and one on the threshold of the house. Thus she hastened back to her beloved. When morning broke, the witch called for her daughter to bring her the apron. No answer came. She cried again, "Where art thou?" "Here on the steps, a-sweeping," replied the drop of blood. The witch hurried there, but found no one. Again she called, "Where art thou?" "In the kitchen, warming myself," answered the second drop. She rushed to the hearth, yet saw no child. Once more she cried, "Where art thou?" "Here in bed, fast asleep," came the third reply. Hastening to the chamber, she found her own daughter lying headless in a pool of dark blood. Then fury seized her. She raged and stormed, then spied from her window the fleeing pair, her stepdaughter and Roland, already far across the fields. "Think not to escape me," she shrieked. "Though ye fly beyond the world's edge, my feet shall o'ertake you." She drew on her enchanted boots, each stride as long as an hour's walk. And soon the ground shrank beneath her until she gained upon them. But the maiden, swift of thought, touched Roland with the wand, and lo, he became a shining lake, while she herself was turned into a snow-white duck that swam upon it. The witch halted by the shore. She strewed crumbs and called sweetly, striving to lure the duck within her grasp. Yet the bird swam wide and would not be beguiled. At length, the crone, weary and empty-handed, returned to her dwelling. When the moon had set, the lovers took their own forms once more and journeyed all night until the east grew pale. Then the maiden struck the wand again, and Roland stood as a wandering fiddler while she herself blossomed into a fair flower hidden within a thorny hedge. Soon the witch's strides shook the ground anew. She hailed the fiddler, "Good musician, pluck for me that lovely flower yonder." "With right good will," quoth Roland, "but first I will play a tune for it." He drew his bow, and the notes leapt forth with enchantment. The witch, compelled against her will, began to dance. Faster and faster the bow flew. Higher and wilder she leapt. The thorns tore her cloak, rent her skin, and bloodied her limbs. He played without ceasing till she sank torn and breathless, and so perished. Thus delivered, the maiden said, "Go thou, Roland, to thy father's house, and make ready for our wedding. I will bide here unseen, changed into a red milestone, till thou return." But Roland, once home, was ensnared by another maiden's wiles, who so clouded his heart that he forgot his true betrothed. Long did the faithful girl wait in the field, yet he came not. At last despair overcame her, and she changed into a sorrowful flower, murmuring, "Let some passer-by tread me down, and so end my grief." Yet it was not destruction that came, but a shepherd who found the flower fair and strange. He plucked it, carried it home, and laid it in his chest. From that hour, fortune smiled upon his house. Hearth swept, water drawn, meals set, all by unseen hands. At length, he grew fearful of the mystery and sought counsel of a wise woman. "There is magic here," said she. "Rise early, and if aught stirs, cast a white cloth upon it, and the spell shall be broken." So the shepherd watched, and at dawn he saw the chest open, and the flower step forth, turning into a maiden. Quick as thought, he cast the cloth, and behold, the enchantment ceased. There stood the lovely girl, who confessed all her tale, and how she had served him unseen. She was so fair and good that he asked her hand, but she refused, saying, "My heart is bound to Roland, though he has betrayed me. Yet I will stay and keep thy house in faith." In time, news spread that Roland's wedding was to be held, and by old custom, all the maidens must come to sing in honor of bride and bridegroom. The faithful one went unwillingly, her heart nigh to breaking. When her turn came, she stood apart and sang in a voice tremulous and sweet. The sound pierced Roland's soul like a blade. He leapt up, crying, "That is the true bride. None other shall I wed." And in that instant, his memory returned, and all false enchantments fell away. So the faithful maiden was joined at last to her dear Roland. Her long sorrow was ended, and her joy began, as light follows the blackest night. The Tempo. The Sparrow. There was once a shepherd's dog, whose master gave him little care, though the faithful beast served him day and night. Instead of reward, he was left to hunger, so wasted away that his bones pressed sharp against his skin. At last, when misery could be endured no longer, the dog resolved to flee. With heavy heart and weary step, he left his master's house and took to the road, carrying with him only sorrow and emptiness of stomach. As he trudged along in this mournful state, a sparrow fluttered down beside him and chirped, "Why droop your head so low, my friend? And why do your eyes carry such sorrow?" "Ah," sighed the dog, "I am faint with hunger. My master starved me till I could bear no more. I have not a crumb to fill my belly." "If that be all," said the sparrow, "cheer up, for I will help you. Follow me to the next town, and you shall not lack food today." Together they came into the town, and passing a butcher's shop, the sparrow whispered, "Stand close by the door. I will fetch you meat." She hopped onto the wooden shelf, cast her sharp eye about to see if anyone watched, and with many a peck and scratch, worked a thick slice of beef loose till it toppled down. The dog caught it in his jaws and ran to a corner, where he devoured it greedily. "Are you satisfied?" asked the sparrow. "Not yet," said the dog, licking his chops, "for I could eat more." "Then follow me again," replied the sparrow. She flew to another shop, and soon pecked down another steak. This too the dog ate, until his hunger was partly stilled. Yet still he longed for bread to soften the meat. "Come then," said the sparrow. "There is a baker near at hand." She struck at the rolls that lay in the window until 2 of them fell. And when the dog ate those, she fetched more from another shop, till at last he was well filled. "Now I am content," said the dog, stretching himself. "Let us walk beyond the town, where the air is cooler." So the 2 companions went together along the highway. But the day was hot, and before long the dog sank down, saying, "I am weary. I must rest and sleep a while." "Very well," said the sparrow. "Lie down here, and I will keep watch from the bush yonder." The dog laid his head upon his paws, and soon slept deeply. While he slumbered, a carter came along the road with a heavy wagon, drawn by 3 stout horses and loaded high with casks of wine. The sparrow saw with horror that the cart was heading straight for the sleeping dog, and the man made no move to turn aside. "Stop! Stop, carter!" cried she. "Turn your wheels, else it shall go ill with you." But the man only scowled. "What care I for you, you chattering bird? Out of my way!" And he cracked his whip so that the cart rolled on. The wheels crushed the poor dog beneath their weight, and he died without a sound. "You villain!" shrieked the sparrow. "You have slain my friend, and for this wickedness you shall pay with all that you own." "Do your worst," sneered the carter. "What harm can such a mite as you do to me?" He drove on, laughing. But the sparrow was not idle. She slipped beneath the covering of the cart and pecked at the wooden bung of a cask until it loosened. Out gushed the red wine, pouring onto the road. Only when the cask was drained dry did the carter notice, and he groaned, "Alas, what ill fortune! My wine is gone." "Not ill enough yet," cried the sparrow, and darted upon the head of one of the horses. She pecked until the beast reared and kicked. The carter, enraged, seized his hatchet and struck, meaning to kill the sparrow. But she flew aside, and his blow fell upon his own horse, which fell dead upon the spot. "Wretch that I am," cried he. "Not wretched enough," screamed the sparrow. Again she loosed the bung of the second cask, and again the wine was lost. Again he struck at her, and again he killed his own horse. Trembling with fury and despair, he drove on with the last horse. But the sparrow tormented that one too, till he killed it in like manner. Now the carter was left with an empty cart, no horses, and no wine. Weary and raging, he dragged himself home. But when he entered, his wife cried out, "Husband, new misfortune has come. A wicked bird has flown into the loft and brought with her 1,000 companions, and they are devouring our corn." He rushed upstairs, and behold, the sparrow sat amidst a great flock, and the grain was nearly gone. "Unhappy man that I am," he cried. "Not unhappy enough yet," said the sparrow. "Your cruelty shall cost you your very life." Mad with grief, he seized his hatchet and hurled it at her, but missed. He shattered the window instead. The sparrow flew in through the broken pane, perched on the seat, and cried again, "Carter, it shall cost you your life." In his frenzy, he struck at her wherever she flew, but his blows fell upon his own chairs, tables, glasses, and cupboards, till the house was broken and ruined. At last the wife caught the sparrow in her hands. "Shall I kill her outright?" she asked. "No," growled the man, "that is too quick a death. I will eat her with my own teeth." So the wife held the bird fast, while the carter bared his teeth in savage glee. But the sparrow fluttered, stretched out her neck, and cried one last time, "Carter, thy cruelty shall yet cost thee thy life." The man, unable to wait, commanded his wife to strike at the bird with the hatchet. She raised it high, but the sparrow wriggled free. Down came the hatchet upon the carter's own head. He fell dead upon the floor, and the sparrow, unharmed, flew out into the wide world, returning at last to her nest in triumph.